like a train, but it isn't. Those sounds were not the real thing, just sound effects. Snap judgments based on first impressions can be wrong. You have to think about what you're hearing and seeing. Handicapped people want you to look at them and see who they really are and what they can do. Judge their abilities, not their handicap. A message from the President's Committee on Employment of the Handicapped.
And good afternoon. This is Charles South Suburbia, Anthony Scariano, and Angelo Ciambroni, co-host today, with a very interesting and well-known Chicago Heights citizen, Mario, better known as Hap Bruno. Welcome, Hap, to Charles South Suburbia.
Thank you, Tony.
Welcome, Hap, and especially for an East Sider.
Hap, we usually begin these programs by asking where you were born.
I was born in 1904, San Benedetto, Italy. It's on the Adriatic Sea, about 60 miles south of Venice.
So you're a Marchigiano.
I'm a Marchigiano.
There's a pretty big colony of Marchigiani. Do you think that this is the biggest colony of Marchigians in the country?
Well, I wouldn't say in the country. I don't have information. At one time, it was the biggest here in Chicago Heights. But there's a lot of Marquis and Heights here, and mainly some of these people that settled in certain areas. And naturally, as long as there was work, they sent for their relatives or friends and so forth, and that's the way they developed these different communities in different places, depending on who the trailblazers were.
Do you know, excuse me, Sam, but do you know of any other colonies of Marchigiani in the United States anywhere? Do the people here in Chicago Heights have ties to other Marchigiani in the United States?
They have relatives, like in Pennsylvania, New York, and other areas.
Yeah.
But a colony like Chicago Heights, I don't think, well, I don't know of any. I don't want to say that there isn't any.
Well, what do you know about that, Sam?
I think Hap is correct. You have a sizable colony in Pennsylvania in some of the communities. Specifically, I can't tell you, but I remember reading that a lot of Marchigians did settle in parts of Pennsylvania. And Chicago Heights is unique, and as Hap stated, you had two group of people from the same town, like the Amazzano from Amazzano and the Marchigians, all from San Benedetto, which is interesting.
Well, the thing that makes me think that you've got the largest colony here is because the town of San Benedetto has adopted Chicago Heights as a twin city.
If you look at the Marchigians in Chicago Heights, they're all from San Benedetto, but La Marca is very large, it's a large area. But from this city, all of them came to Chicago Heights.
All right, then let's modify that. Then the San Benedetto are probably, those who came to this country are very largely over here in Chicago Heights.
I would say 90% probably.
San Benedetto, Paisano.
Ho capito. You were born there then?
Yes, sir.
And how old were you when you came over here?
I was 22 months old when I got here in 1906.
Well, then you were practically born here. Did you come
22
directly?
months difference.
Did you come directly to Chicago Heights?
Yes, it was very interesting. My dad came here about a year earlier and got a job with the hod carriers, and he worked at the American Manganese at night, working night and day, sleeping a couple hours to get enough money so that he could send for my mother and me, of course. And
you were the only child at that time.
That's right. And we had a very, my mother had a very bad experience when we came across. Well, I was vaccinated, and I guess I developed a fever, and she lost me at Ellis Island for almost 14 days and didn't know where I was at. She went crazy. And we came over here to, and my mother, when she landed in Chicago Heights and saw nothing but wood buildings, she thought she had come to Gypsy Town, beautiful country, but far from what it was in Italy with all the stone and marble places.
You know, this is unique because my dad says the same thing about my grandmother. She couldn't stand the city of Chicago with all the wooden buildings, Bella Italia with the nice, strong buildings. You come here with wooden sidewalks, cold weather. It was really an experience.
Yeah, the buildings in Italy.
Well, that was just something that I heard, of course, you know, Ramin repeated and how she felt at the time, of course. She was a hard-working lady, and she helped my dad. And of course, being one of the first families here, these youngsters that came across, that took their chances of going to a foreign country looking to better themselves, and all they were mainly looking for was an opportunity to work, because in Italy, circumstances were such that it was pretty hard for them to get anything meaningful in the way of, from an economic standpoint. And she developed, through these friendships from the same town, they referred one to the other, and as a result, she took in a bunch of these youngsters. She had as high as 16 what we call boarders staying at the house at one time. And she washed their clothes and cooked their meals. That time, Tony, it was only $3 for a month.
$3 a month.
And we had a lot of people here. That's what
room and board?
Room and board.
Room and board?
No, room washing and so forth and cooking. She didn't furnish the meals.
She didn't, I see.
So, but I remember way back when, DeAngelis, his dad, and his two brothers, they were boarders at our house. The Damianis were boarders.
This is the senator's family.
That's right.
Yeah.
And
the Damianis, are they Marchigiani? I thought the
Damianis are Marchigiani.
No.
No.
There are some Calabrese Damiani, aren't there?
No, all Marchigiani.
But there is a...
couple of mixed marriages.
Yeah.
Well, Damiani's a very...
The Bagnonis, and one of the big families I remember was the Sebastians. Mr. Sebastian came across from the old country, and then his 5 daughters came over with his son Frank, and they were in our home. And I know my mother, I was old enough to remember, she was very worried having 5 young ladies in the house with other boarders and so forth. And in fact, the oldest, Chiarina, married Alspina. And I remember when Alspina used to court his wife, of course they weren't allowed to sit side by side. One sat in the corner of the room and the other corner. And of course I always waited around. I was about 11 or 12 years old then, because he always brought over a little bit of goodies for the kids. I remember that very strongly.
Trying to get in on the good side. Another thing on the cooking, Hap, your mother would cook. They would buy their own food.
Yes.
So on a cold stove, she might have 10 or 15 pots, different to whoever wanted to eat. But it wasn't
they
one.
They tried to consolidate though the dishes, so try to make it 1 or 2 main dishes.
Right, but if a boarder said, I wanted tripa tonight, he'd buy the tripa and the boss would cook it. And that would be kind of hard on a cook stove. I like to see the people today do that.
Well, you know, Tony, one of the biggest things, I think it helped me out a whole lot. We used to have these people, these boarders, they'd have no place to go, but they'd sit around at night. And they always had an educated individual, you know what I mean, who would read to them. I can remember this, he considered a professor in Italy, but Giuseppe Gocci. And he'd read these books, Il Guerino detto il Meschino, Fioramonte, the equivalent of King Arthur in his court. And then short stories. I probably was one of the best short storytellers in school I could translate. I mean, a short story, and I was asked many times to give a short story, and mainly because of this man. Night after night, we would have these reading sessions. In fact, I learned how to read and write Italian. I mean, before I went to Mont Carmel's, and I went there in the 5th grade. Not good, but enough to get by. In fact, when I was a youngster, I used to write letters for some of the young people to their Italian friends, except that I'd write the same old stereotype. To scrive questa due righe per farti sapere della nostra buon salute, così spero di voi, you know.
Oh, you had the boilerplate all down pat.
That's right.
Well, when you do that in volume, Hap, you could make a little buck on it. Did you charge for that?
No, I didn't charge. Now, these boarders, at that time, what the Mexican people are doing now, they used to go out what they called a la farm, but it wasn't a farm. They were railroaders. They'd get a group together with one cook, and then they'd get in these boxcars, like I remember Reading, Pennsylvania, Darn, Nebraska. They'd go in these out-of-way places and repair rails, and they had nowhere to spend their money. They would save that $300, $400, $500, $600 and put in a full season, you know what I mean, in the summertime, working in the railroad tracks. Then you'd hear a lot of story from these boys that worked there when they came back about the jackrabbits as big as dogs in Nebraska, and the different things, the pranks that they played on each other and so forth. And it was a very interesting life, and nobody expected anything except what they worked for.
All right, so you came here about 1906 then.
That's right.
And what was Chicago like? What are your earliest recollections of Chicago Heights?
Well, my earliest recollections of Chicago Heights are really mud streets, wood sidewalks, and I remember getting lost about when I was 3 years old at Wentworth Avenue in the alley.
How many days this time?
Huh?
How many days this time?
No, it was just a momentary loss. I mean, I strayed away from home. And the old days were such that I remember the young fellas, because when I worked at Harper Brothers, they used to make wooden guns, just to drill. You had no society, legit, a lightweight society. And they'd call and they'd raise their hand, and the first guy to call, they'd have to go over and tap the other guy three times on their backs. They had a membership of about 140. And this is in the early 1914, 1950, and they would drill at the old Lime Hill in East Chicago, over at the east side.
Victor Chemical.
No, the Lime Hill where Funk Brothers at, where Carl Pignotti's factory is at.
Oh, that's right. I remember that Lime Hill. Right across the
Then I always waited around because they played Butch on Sunday afternoon, and I was the boy that went over and got a pail of beer for him, and I'd always get a nickel or something. I mean, at the end of the day.
Hap, where did that Lime Hill come from? Was that from Victor Chemical? Did they dump the lime there?
Well, you know, all I remember was the Lime Hill there as a kid, and never knew where it come from.
I remember it too. We used to play. We used to dig holes in there, and I always, now it comes back to me where that lime came from.
We used to sled there in the wintertime, you know what I mean, and it was a pretty good sized Lime Hill.
Oh, yes.
And played.
Was it just waste from the factory?
It must have
been. The same type material practically that you have in that great big pile now at the back of Victor Chemical. They got a great big...
it could be chemical waste.
It's chemical waste that's hard to get rid of.
Right.
There's hardly any use for it.
I remember when I was a youngster, we had the one Lime Hill on 16th and 5th Avenue, and then the other one was at the Victor, which is Stauffer Chemical, which was the big one. And that was a place where the Spinozzi boys started the pole vault. Do you remember Tony Spinozzi and Joe from Wentworth Avenue? Where'd you live, Hap?
I lived at 1628, right across from Funk Manufacturing Company.
No, when you came, that wasn't the place, was it?
No, I lived, we moved. We were right next to the old Brandwine clothing store at 15th and Wentworth Avenue. And then Pilato finally built. My dad built a house. It cost him $2,700 on 5th Avenue. But we lived there for a couple of years at Pilato's home.
Well, what was transportation like in those days? Do you remember?
You'd walk.
You'd walk? Horse and wagon?
Horse and wagon.
But buggies?
If you could afford it. My dad had bought a small lot in East Chicago Heights at the bottom of the hill there. And the first time he planted tomatoes in that virgin soil, we just got bushels of it, and it was just carrying it on your backs.
They had a good green thumb. They knew how to get how to coax things out of that earth.
And I can remember walking the path along Route 30 because the streets were muddy. I mean,
what was public transportation like?
Public transportation, I don't remember anything except the streetcar track on 16th Street. I mean, in my memory, there had.
Where did that go?
Well, I can't even tell you that. I mean, that went from, because that was eliminated, I guess, in the early 30s.
I imagine you had connections to Kankakee, to Chicago, to
yes,
Joliet.
Yes. You had the old, that interurban that came through, that connected with Monee, Kankakee, because I used it to go to Monee in basketball.
What about, did the Milwaukee Road have a train station, a passenger station on 16th and Stewart Avenue?
16th and Stewart.
Right.
No, the B&O had a station at 16th and where...
That's Stewart.
Well, the Stewart Avenue.
Yeah, right.
That was the B&O.
Well, Milwaukee B&O, but that was a passenger.
What's
that?
Passenger station.
To Chicago.
That's right.
And then you had the CNI.
They used to carry a lot of people to the South Holland onion fields.
Do you remember taking trips on the public transportation, the railroad or the interurban? You remember that?
Only back in those days, we operated within a close proximity of home. Now, the farthest I've ever taken a trip was to Monee, and after we were a young fellow. Otherwise, we take the CNI to Polk Street. with the regular basketball team.
How about the Illinois Central? Was it functioning at the time?
No, sir.
It was not going to Chicago?
Well, there might have been, but we didn't use it.
All right, let's. This is a good place to stop for a short commercial break, Joe.
Savoya's is the one place you can take the entire family out to dinner without spending a fortune. Because now Savoya's has Family Festival, a complete delicious dinner served family style. Family Fest includes salad, Savoya's own homemade spaghetti and chicken, beverage and dessert, all for just $5 per person. Savoya's Family Festival is featured Sunday from 3 to 7:30 p.m. and Monday through Thursday from 5 to 7:30 p.m.
Take your family to Savoya's, located on the Lincoln Highway, a quarter of a mile east of Western Avenue in Chicago Heights.
Now we're back again with Chow South Suburbia. In my excitement, I forgot to tell you that Dominic Candeloro and Roseanne Raviola, our usual co-hosts on these Sunday broadcasts, couldn't come here. They have got things to attend, and they'll report on them next Sunday. We missed them very much, and we've got Joe Cassidy at the controls, and Sam Shimbroni, prominent attorney and our racing board member here from Chicago Heights. Welcome, Sam. I forgot to say at least welcome, although...
Always happy to be here.
And our guest for today is Mario, better known as Hap Bruno, well-known figure in Chicago Heights in many areas, business, politics, and bon vivant.
And sports.
And sports. We must talk about sports. Well, all right. It probably was beyond people's means to take long trips on the interurban or the railroads. So you lived within this microcosm here in Chicago Heights. Where did the Market-John colony settle?
Well, they settled Wentworth Avenue, Portland, 5th.
South of 14th Street.
I'd say south of Hanover. I mean, east of Hanover. And
East
south
of Hanover.
And south of Route 30, although there was a number of them that was north of Route 30.
Yeah, you had the
all
Camel-
within that area.
You had the
Camellies,
Camellies,
and
right.
you had a group of people, probably as many Market Johns, north of US 30.
I'd like you to mention as many family names as you can.
Well, all
as
these
you
old
recall.
families,
Yeah.
especially like the Camellies and the Vignonis and the Malizios and the
Frazzini.
the Frazzinis and the Spinas, of course, became a pretty big clan. And well, just those 5 girls, they married. And you see, you have a lot of people related among the Market Johns whose names, because of the girl part of it, are entirely different. Like my uncle, for instance, had 8 girls. So we wind up with Bianconis and Pilandozis and Jastrabs and Capriottis and so forth.
The Bruno name,
The Bruno name in that particular family disappeared because they get all the girls that married, and they in turn, of course, raised children that, well, most of them were doing pretty well. I went doctor in San Diego and business enterprises in St. Anne and so forth. And in other words, all they intended to do, Tony, as I remember most, was get out there, be well-liked, and do your job, and hold your job.
And these were all hard-working people.
All hard-working
As you
people.
mentioned, your father had 2 jobs to save enough money to get the rest of the family.
To try to achieve what he wanted, and that was to get my mother here. And my dad worked at the Inland Steel and also did a little bit of concrete contracting on the side. Then things got tough in 1913, and I remember with the DeFranks was also a big family, although not Market John, but they went down to southern Indiana, and I remember them bringing back a bushel of real black peat dirt. And they were all enthused on what that kind of dirt would produce, and they were going to, the following spring, see what they could do about starting and renting some land down there. And then my dad, of course, was killed that fall. He got a job with Persendos at the St. Joseph Church. They were building the St. Joseph Church. And there was an accident, an elevator accident, and he was killed in that accident, only lived about 3 days. And so my youngest brother was only 15 days old at the time.
And how old were you?
I was 9 and a half.
No workman's compensation in those
No,
days.
oh, wait a while. There was $12.54 every 2 weeks, but
For
that
how
was
long?
just I don't remember the length of it. I know this, that it was a bare minimum with a family of 5 kids. Then, of course, we ran. My mother has to be up in heaven. If there's a heaven, God, we have to believe, or otherwise we're like animals. She was a woman that just bore her crosses, and I can still remember. We used to consider the guardian angel of the east side. And always it's God's will. It's the will of God. It's the will of God. So I had a brother that got infantile paralysis when he was 2.5 years old, and a sister killed at the South Holland while clipping onions, because we take the whole family there. And this particular thing, it's too lengthy how it happened, but it happened. And at the death of my sister, the following night, my youngest brother was there, and this Dr. West from St. Louis says that we all have that infantile germ in us. A scare brings it out. Whether that's the truth or not, I'm only repeating what I heard as a kid. And at this, he let out this one yell, and he was completely all curled up, arms, legs, and everything else at the same time that the body was brought home. And that following morning, in other words, I mean, I was up with him most of the night. I was a young, tried to take.
Well, your mother really did go through a lot.
Well, she did a whole lot, Tony, but she instilled a feeling of, I don't know what it was. She had her own sayings. In Italian, she said,
character.
"Ne media fa de media." Never be jealous, but be competitive. Right. Tell me who you go with, and I'll tell you what you are.
Sure.
Aim high. If you fall halfway, you're still all right. Where she got all those sayings, I can go on, and I just don't. I'm not here because, for that particular reason, I know there's a lot more things more important.
She raised this family.
She raised this family, and
how many children?
She raised, well, it was 3 brothers and 2 sisters, and the one that was killed, and then my sister Edith.
She did this practically all by herself with what
She did that all by herself without any help. We worked long hours. She took in washing, and she worked at the American Manganese. We had her rub this brother of mine 3 times a day, half hour in the morning, half hour at night, half hour at night, and in the afternoon. And the DeFranks, who were our good neighbors, even
the taxi
fed him, breastfed my brother.
Right.
Those are the taxi cabs.
That's right.
They're Calabrese, aren't they?
No, they're...
I thought that they were a Calabrese family.
No, they're related to the DeFranks, and I'm sorry to say, I don't think they're Nebulodown.
We'll get some phone calls on it, I'm sure.
Yeah, I should know.
I should know, too, and I just can't refresh
I feel a little embarrassed now, because...
Well, what caused the Market Johns to settle where they did, around 14th and Hanover?
Well, you see, at that time, most of the homes were built where your work was at. So the first settlement here was really where the factories were at. And so they built their homes right adjacent to their livelihood. And so they built.
So they could walk
on
to work.
Fifth, on Portland, on Wentworth, so they could walk to work.
and come home for lunch.
That's right. That's right. That was a big factor then, because you just didn't go out and get your meals. You came home for lunch. And that was a big factor.
Or also, the kids used to bring to lunch around 11 o'clock with the old-fashioned
I did
metal
that.
lunch bucket.
I did, with the old-fashioned lunch bucket. I remember bringing lunch to my dad at the Inland Steel. At that time, he was firing the boilers. And sit there while he was all sweated up to eat and take the lunch bucket back. I mean, and during the summertime, during my vacation.
You know, East Chicago Heights, Hap, that, a lot of people bought lots out there. Was that going to be the Garden of Eden?
Well, my dad was one of the first ones that bought a lot, that corner lot, and what they were looking for was some land to work. I don't think they had any idea about the expansion and the value of the land in later life. They were looking for a place to have a garden.
Right.
And there wasn't any. The highway there wasn't considered a highway. It was nothing but a mud street. It was impassable after a heavy rains of a couple of days. You had no traffic on it at all.
And the amazing thing, they would carry that produce home on your back or a little wagon.
Well, I'll say this. My mother was a strong woman. I've seen her when we went for coal, we went for iron, and when we discovered that iron right next to the Mont Carmel Club in that field. We got to digging one day. I'm going to school there, and the one piece of iron comes up. See, they had burnt boxcars there for years. And we developed a regular mining operation. And I've carried 175 pounds when I was 7, where it took, and you put your hands on your knees and just take a 6-inch step and just crawl back in. And they used to make a ring with their apron, take their apron and curl it up, put it on her head, and then I've seen 4 men lift, and she'd put her head under it, you know what I mean, and then walk away with almost 200 pounds.
Okay, good place to stop for the 125 news, and we're going to turn it over to Joe Cassidy, and we'll be right back after the news break.
Good afternoon, 125. The current temperature reading 50 degrees in South Suburbia. I'm Joe Cassidy reporting for South Suburban News. A 27-year-old Chicago Heights man remains in critical condition in the St. Francis Hospital intensive care unit, undergoing treatment for multiple stab wounds inflicted Friday night during an argument with a former girlfriend. Police say Slager Gardner was apparently stabbed with a piece of broken glass. Gardner of 1571 Center Avenue is reportedly in stabilized condition at the Blue Island Hospital. Police have charged 24-year-old Terry Howard of 301 East 12th Street with aggravated battery in connection with the stabbing incident. A new bank has been given permission to organize, and one of the organizers is a 42nd District State Representative. Illinois Commissioner of Banks and Trust Companies, William Harris, says the permit has been issued to the Bank of Orland Park. One of the founders is listed to State Representative Jack Davis of Beecher. The bank will have $1.75 million in capital. The bank will be located at 7450 West 159th Street. More than 2,500 jobs will be available for low-income youth this summer through the Community and Economic Development Association of Cook County. CETA officials say they will begin taking applications from youth 14 to 21 years of age on May 1st. CETA places people in positions with county and municipal governments, libraries, park districts, legal aid offices, schools and daycare centers. Participants in the Summer Youth Employment Program will be paid minimum wage and work up to 25 hours per week from June 16th to August 29th. Applications may be picked up at the Chicago Heights Community Service Center, the East Chicago Heights Service Center, the Robbins Human Development Center, the Harvey Area Community Service Center, or the Blue Island Community Service Center. Applicants should bring documents showing age, permanent address, a birth certificate, or resident alien status certificate, family
drug pushing to minors can lead to double penalties. Here is a point of law from the Illinois State Bar Association. Illinois drug laws are structured to provide a harsher penalty for those who push drugs than for those who merely possess them. The laws also provide a greater penalty for those who push drugs to persons who are minors. For instance, any person who is 18 years old and delivers marijuana to a person under 18 years of age, who is at least 3 years his junior, may be sentenced to a term of imprisonment for a term up to twice the maximum otherwise provided for the delivery of marijuana. The law is intended to discourage pushers from providing drugs to minors. Point of Law is a public affairs presentation of the Illinois State Bar Association and this station.
All right, now we're back on Chow South Suburbia. And our guest host is Sam Ciambrone. I'm Anthony Scariano. We miss Dominic Candeloro and Roseanne Rabiola. They'll be back next week. Tell us about their exciting things that they're doing today. And our guest today is our well-known Mario Hap Bruno. During the break, we got a couple of telephone calls, one from Marshall DeFrank, who told us, and I know we'd get something on it, that the DeFrank family is Abruzzese, and we're grateful to him for supplying this information, which brings me to my next question. We talked about the Marcajan settling around 14th and Hanover. Where did the other Italian groups settle in Chicago Heights?
Well, the other Italian groups, as they came in, whatever was available, and as it built up closer to the plants, naturally the other homes were built maybe on Hanover, Low Avenue, Parnell Street, then the Hill, because you had factories on the Hill. So they all built their homes where their friends were at. Well, whoever moved in a certain area, it seems like attracted people of the same section from Italy. And they weren't 100% intact, one group. But more or less, within that block, you'd find 90% of whether they were Sicilians or whether they had Calabrese, Napolitans, or Marcagians, and what have you. And however, I will say this, there was a certain amount of rivalries back in them days, but everybody intermixed as real, honest-to-God friends, you know.
Right. The Sicilians probably were west of Center Avenue, and then the Calabrese and the Marcagians were on, say, east of Center Avenue between 17th Street all the way down to 12th and 13th. And then
what accounted for this clannishness? The having come from the same part of the old country.
You know, they talk about paesans. That means from the same town.
And they stayed there.
So the people that came from the same town visited the people that they were supposed to meet here. And so when they did, made their friendships, the thing was to move next door to them or build next door to them.
Right.
So they remained within the same geographical area, because close to their livelihood, the plants. And
then being in a strange land, they wanted to hang on to the only thing that they really felt close to, and that is people from the same town.
Right, Hap. What about the church and the school? Do you remember the founding of St. Rocco and where the first Mass, if you can remember?
I was just a young boy when they founded the St. Rocco Parish, and I can remember every Saturday walking with my mother to go over there, because she'd go over and wash the church floors. Every Saturday, a group of these Italian women would go over there, and they'd take a section of the church and wash the floors and clean the pews and so forth.
As if they didn't have enough to do at home.
They had enough to do at home, but that was volunteer work that
Right.
they felt they were religious enough to feel it was like an obligation, and nobody...
Their contributions,
That's
their
right.
tithe.
Right. You see, Hap was quite young. The St. Rocco Church is 1906, and 1981 we're going to have our diamond...
You remember that better than Happy, huh?
Diamond Jubilee. But what about Mount Carmel School? You were one of the early graduates from there,
Yes,
weren't
I
you?
was probably the third year, and the early graduates was like Patrick Ross and Angelo Primavera, and even Joe Napoli graduated the year before I did. But we were, I believe, the third group that came out, and we were only a class of 5.
Right.
You talk about instruction. Now, we didn't need bilingual We got by without the bilingual setup. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be controversial, but I went to school the first year with the wrong name, Tony. Can you feature anything like that? Either I was stupid.
What was the wrong name?
Well, I was brought to school by Phil Ross, and my dad's name was Massimo, and they gave me my name Massimo. So
then your legal
being
name.
not being educated and knowing too much English, so Massimo went for the first year at the Franklin School.
Well, isn't your real name Mario?
My real name is Mario, but my dad's name was Massimo.
Massimo, Maximus.
That's
right.
So, and I'll say this, that my name was corrected on the school records the second year.
So it became Mario permanently.
Yeah,
then.
Mario.
They had this mistake.
Mario Bruno. It was a mistake, and I evidently accepted, although I told them what my name was. I mean, after I started to make headway. And I don't want to appear a complete dummy because I happened to be very good in school. In fact, I jumped from the 5th to the 7th A, and when they sent me to Mount Carmel School, feeling that religion might do me some good after my dad died and hold me in a little stricter and narrower path to follow, they put me back in the 5th, figuring I was too young to be that far advanced. So, but it's stupid what happened the first year to me.
This is some personal thing with this graduating class. About 10 years ago, we had a 50th anniversary. My mother-in-law is in the graduating class with Hap and Annie Jacobucci. And now there were 2 girls and I think 3 boys.
Andy Primavera, Joe Caparelli, and myself.
And then Annie Jacobucci and Daisy Puerio. And that was, we had a nice reunion. But like the church is 1906, and I meant to say, Hap was very active in church. What are we going to do for a Diamond Jubilee of our church, Hap? You've been on a couple committee with us. What do you think we should do?
Well, of course, that church has meant a whole lot to a lot of people. And I graduated from Mount Carmel School. My kids graduated from Mount Carmel School. My grandchildren have graduated from Mount Carmel School, except for my youngest boy, Mario, who lives near St. Kieran. We're not that clannish, but I mean, we've been very much attached to the church, and I feel like I got a tremendous education out of there. The only education I've had is a grammar school education. I was very good at mathematics. In fact, I thought that I knew it all. I'm sorry to say, because that's all I had known. But nevertheless, I mean, anything they do, I'm 100% for it. If they want to make a 3 or a week celebration, I'm in favor of it.
Now, what about the Mount Carmel Club, which is a separate organization, not affiliated with the church? You've been active with the sports at Mount Carmel. Why don't you give us the format?
Angelo, way back when, Father Rinzullo, he was a man with tremendous willpower. He had a lot of pride. He was a forceful individual. So he formed this club for the Mount Carmel graduates to keep them together, sort of a social organization. Then we introduced athletics. When we introduced athletics, he became very interested because we had some very good boys early, like Jaime the Butch. He bought him a catcher's mitt, and then he bought tennis rackets for Joe Cafarelli and I because we couldn't afford them. We had tennis, we had basketball. We wound up with, and this is when our facilities in the Mount Carmel School was on the outside. If they freeze, you had hardly no place to go. I mean, we're talking about no gymnasium, nothing like that. And this club was just a small building in back of the school. But from that club, I think we got a whole lot of it. All the members have gotten a whole lot of that out of that association together. We worked hard. It give you a feeling of competitiveness because of sport. I was athletic chairman for 17 years, and we had teams that were outplayed outweighed, not outplayed, by 35 and 40 pounds. But we beat them because we practiced night after night. It wasn't a question of a bunch of stars coming in and meeting you. And as a result, there's a tremendous amount of feeling among these boys, and look what they're doing. Even now, they're giving anywhere from 12 to 15 barbecues every year. The last one was 104 people. The hall was full. And they're coming from Kankakee to East Side. A lot of other people are participating in it.
What about the baseball? You've been very active in baseball. The Greater Chicago Baseball League, that was one of the first semi-pro leagues in this area. Why don't you give us some information on your beginning that league, Hap?
Well, what happened to me was I became pretty active. And as a youngster, we formed what we called Chicago Heights Standards. That's back in 1919. And here I was born 1904. I was only 15 years old. So we had the Chicago Heights Standards for 2 years. Then Mont Carmel's formed a baseball team. We sort of, most of the boys were from the Mont Carmels anyway, so the Mont Carmels sponsored the team. Well, the Mont Carmel team went until we won the championship of the Indiana League, which meant Indiana, Illinois, Valparaiso, Whiting, East Chicago, Hammond, in 1926. Then in 1927, Chicago Heights Baseball Park was being built. We played in 27. Then several of us from the Mont Carmels got on the town team. And about that time is when they quit sponsoring baseball, as far as Mont Carmels were concerned, and devoted most of their attention to football. I was athletic chairman for 17 years there.
What about the Owls? You remember the Chicago Heights Owls?
The Owls were a group of boys that, from a neighborhood around 5th Avenue and 16th Street, the Old Barrel. They had facilities downstairs. And, of course, it drew from all over. I mean, they started the ball club, and this John Perry at the time, who followed baseball, semi-pro baseball, he formed a club, and they played their games at East Chicago, not East Chicago Heights, off of Arnold Street and 16th at that park.
What the Nathan Seifert Park now, I think the name has been changed again.
Yeah, well, they played there, and then they played under the name Arrows from the Owls at the Heights Park for 2 years. I booked for them during the time.
You were also the manager, weren't you?
Yes, I was the manager. I've managed baseball from, with the early Mont Carmels until 1952. I put in a lot of years, over 30-some years in baseball, and I loved every minute of it.
Weren't you one of the founders of the, was it the Greater Chicago Semi-Pro? Why don't you give us some background on that, Hap? You're being modest about your baseball experiences.
See, we used to meet at 210 West Madison Street under the old Midwest Semi-Pro. And you had different divisions there. Of course, we were in the top division and had a good team. Then a group of the better ball clubs thought it'd be a good idea to form what we would call a super semi-pro setup. And we formed a Greater Chicago Semi-Pro Baseball League. I was the only president of that league. I'm happy to say it was an awful job because ordinarily in athletics or anything else, you're only as strong as the weakest link. And when you have 8 teams, now Sam, and 1 or 2 can't develop and stay up and stand the pace, you develop dropouts. And the only way we could furnish good baseball was that we had to have a mandatory side bet. So you had something to lose on that particular game. You didn't come up with a bunch of scrubs and put a bunch of scrubs just to complete your schedule. So we had a mandatory setup as far as side betting. And certain rules, we tried to make it along the lines of the Major League setup. Properly uniformed, 1-5 you took the field and the bell rang, and 1-15 you came off so that the fans got uniformity and they could expect infield practice, hitting practice, and so forth. And we developed a tremendous semi-pro league, and we won it in 1949.
Now, also, the baseball fields, I think a lot of the people in Chicago Heights don't remember the baseball fields. We used to have one on 17th and East End Avenue and other places. Why don't you give us some background on the experiences building these?
Well, the one on East End Avenue, that goes all the way back. It has to go back to, I'd say, in the early 1900s, because I can remember being there about, especially when I must have been around 9 years old, and I'm sitting behind these players, old Skinny Jones and Schrader and the Warmy brothers, a rain out. They were waiting for the rain to ease up, and I'm sitting listening to the ball players, which was like heaven to you. You know, the young kids are listening to your heroes or your idols talk about the game. And then when that part was eliminated, a group of people formed an organization called the Chicago Heights Athletic Association. and we put up this ballpark. And I'm happy to say there wasn't a single dime of public money went in there. It was all through public subscription. I mean tax money.
And this was all these athletic programs were all private, and nothing, no contributions from any political divisions of the community.
No contributions from any political divisions. The only thing you did was approach your friends on season tickets, those that would help support the program.
All right, just a short break over here, and we'll be right back.
As your local radio service, we find ourselves performing some unusual services. One thing listeners tell us we're very good at is finding lost dogs, even cats and other pets, plus car keys, glasses, and other assorted items. If you've lost or found a dog or something, call us and we'll be happy to broadcast the information at WCGO and WTAS. Call us at 754-4335, 754-4335. We're doggone glad we can help.
All right, now back again with Ciao South Suburbia and Sam Shimbroni, co-host, with Hap Bruno, our guest. I just want to say that during one of our breaks, Nick Zarante, a real loyal fan of ours, called and told us that the first Micro John family was Phil Napoli, about 1891. He was a tailor, and he talked about the Michigan Railroad, too. Michigan Central, was that it?
Michigan Central, right.
All right, fine.
By the inland steamer.
All right. Well, we've got Chicago Heights early history down pat. Hap, you say you went only through Mount Carmel School. That's the only education you've had.
Well, I've had more education. I mean, I've had night school, correspondence school. I went to Chicago Central College of Commerce.
But your education was interrupted, though.
Yeah, interrupted.
You did not go right to high school from Mount Carmel.
No, I didn't go to
You
high
went to work,
I went to work.
helped to support your family.
That's right.
You're very successful in business. Tell us how you did it.
Well, Tony, I'd say if you're lucky, anything will do for brains. All I looked for at any time was a job. And I got a job at the American Manganese Steel in the late part of 1918, 7.5 cents an hour at the core room.
You're about 14 years old.
That's right. And at Christmas time, Joe Trebo, Al Trebo just died, a real good friend of mine all these years, and the Trebo family is another one, a real old-timers here that contributed a whole lot because they were an outstanding group of brothers that really contributed. And Joe tapped my back while in church and asked me, said, well, I'm getting a little bit mixed up, pardon me, but he wanted to see me after Mass and not to leave. So he offered me a job at Hartwell Brothers for 20 cents an hour. And I said, well, I'd have to see my mother. Of course, my uncle was already working there, and she knew of the stability of this company in 1907. This may be way out of line, but she claimed that's the only company that paid with money at that time. Now, I'm sure they didn't use script, but that stands out as being told to me. So I went to work there, and it was just a question of application. I did certain things in that area that today would be considered sacrilegious against the labor interest. In other words, I mean, if you could produce, you produced. You didn't kill the job, but you just turned around, you were able-bodied, and you worked, and certain things that I did were gained me recognition and whatever I could do and help, and I made rapid strides from one department to the other. I was superintendent of that plant when I was 21 years old with 140 people there.
What did they manufacture, Hap?
They manufactured all different type of handles, axe handles, railroad pick handles, spike mauls, sledge, claw hammer handles, hatchet, and so forth, and out of hickory, ash, and oak, and considered the world's largest handle factory. They had 3 branches, Walkerville, Ontario, Memphis, Tennessee, and Chicago Heights. Heights was the main one at the time, and 16 feeder mills scattered throughout the Hickory Belt, like Poplar Bluff, Missouri, Blevins, Arkansas, etc.
Now you were next to the Hartwell, was the King Cole Brewery. Do you remember the brewery, Hap? Could you give us some?
I remember that brewery. I remember when it was raided, and
This is during Prohibition days?
yes, Ernie Gaughan and I, in fact, might have cost me something because someone thought that I had turned it in. I didn't know what it was. There was no evidence of nothing except tracks at night, you know what I mean, in the snow. And we really didn't know what was in there. And boy, they're great big vats with all that corn sugar piled up. I mean, I think it was one of the biggest in Cook County.
Right, and you know, they say the land of the sky blue waters, the Chicago Heights water must have been pretty good at that time to have a brewery. I would doubt it today if we can brew any beer with our water.
Well,
what do you think about that, Hap?
I was talking about the brewery, and what followed was a big still. The brewery itself, what was it, Hap Bruno?
Right, Hap Bruno. I remember it as King Cole, and now you were interested politically. At one time, I remember, was it 40 when you ran for supervisor of the township? And I think, was that the first?
No, that was township.
Township.
Town clerk, I mean.
Town clerk. I remember the election. It was in 40, wasn't it?
Yes, 1941.
41.
Sam, what happened to me was your environment and association makes you what you are. Now, through my athletics and so forth, I played ball all during those years, and some of my closest friends, like Mark Phoenix and Bill Siebert and Carmi DeButch, at that time, they used to have to almost use a Republican to put a Democratic worker on a board. I mean, it was mostly Republican, so my dad did not have his citizenship papers at the time that he died. In fact, I had to apply for them myself because I was born in Italy. And so I became a Republican. I think my first experience was working on for some school board members that Joe Pye, who was a very active individual, asked me to help on. The next one was the Lily White campaign. B.A. Kopp, one of the founders or charter members of Chicago Heights Country Club, he got interested in Hildeman against Jack Thomas, and they called it the Lily White Party. And of course, that was his first campaign because certain things happened on the Hill at that time that got a little bit rough, and he didn't want to know more out of politics. But I got involved because of my boss involved with me, you know what I mean, in that Hildeman campaign. Of course, the minute you're involved with something that didn't quite fit the majority victors, that kind of branded me as being the maverick of some kind.
But what about the Italians politically in Chicago Heights? Were they predominantly Republican, which was strange since there were working people and not Democratic? What was the reasoning for that?
Well, prior to 1930, 29, the bust, they were mainly all of them Republicans. All of them were doing all right with the economic conditions as they were. But after the bust, I have heard Italian say, he says, I love Roosevelt better than I do my own dad. Now, that was told to me in a group over at Highway Steel because of what Roosevelt did and trying to give them some substance, you know what I mean, because they had nothing. In other words, when they had fallen apart, he filled that breach with the WPA, et cetera, and whatever it was, and put the NRA with a minimum ceiling of 15 cents an hour and so forth, and with the old Blue Eagle. And so at that time, and they naturally, because of economic conditions, joined a party that they thought helped them.
Yeah, but at that time there wasn't, was it still Republican? The Italians were predominantly Republican, even though their sentiments might have been Democratic because of Roosevelt and the New Deal. But weren't they still Republicans?
No, I mean, from there on in, we formed a Young Republicans organization. We had about 780 people. This is in the late 30s. All through the 30s, they went completely Democrat.
But locally, they were Republican, though, weren't they? In local politics.
Well, this is during the time of when Gannon he got in there 2 terms prior to 41, and they had switched allegiance, and then Dan Bergen was a mayor, you know, of course, probably with the help of some Republicans. I mean, those things are behind the scenes. It's a hard thing to decipher. So anyway, to make a long story short, it was all Democratic. After Bergen, you wound up with Gannon.
Well, that was mayor, but like on the township, I think if you go back in the history...
It was all Democratic.
Where they went Dr. Hay, and then after, I think they were only in 1 term, weren't they?
No, they were in 2 terms, because Ralph Guidotti ran for my job in 1937, and they got a bad beating. Then we formed a Harmony ticket in 1941 to with Gannon's group, the Chicago Heights Star.
So we had a
And
Republican.
the Republican setup.
Right, we had a Republican, then because of Depression, Democratic for, say, 8 township years, and then it went back Republican. I
Went
think
back Republican
you were
41, that's right.
And what was that lady that was the supervisor?
Mrs. Robbins won by 3 votes, and that's the famous recount. After a recount, now listen to this, of the entire township, there wasn't but 1 vote change. What a difference. In the last election with Carmi, Frisco,
Right.
a recount and naming just a few precincts and get all that change.
Sorry, we've got to cut it off. A very interesting program. We'll have to have you back, Hap. We've got a lot of things to cover, including your wonderful family and your son, who's township supervisor. But we've got to cut it off now. Thanks very much for coming. This is Anthony Scariano
And this is Sam Bruni.
saying goodbye for Ciao Suburbia, and see you back next week with Roseanne Rabiola and Dominic Candeloro. Thank you.
Good afternoon at 1:55. The current temperature reading 51 degrees. I'm Joe Cassidy reporting for South Suburban News. Harvey firemen are continuing mop-up efforts this afternoon at the Harvey Holiday Inn located at 171st and Halstead. Firemen were called to the scene this morning. One report said the fire was on the 4th floor of the motel. There were reports of flame shooting from windows. In addition, some people were reported trapped inside their rooms. Heavy smoke in the hallways apparently made escape difficult or impossible. The last report said the fire had been nearly extinguished. Firemen remain on the scene this afternoon. A 24-year-old East Chicago Heights man is being held this weekend in Cook County Jail on a $100,000 bond charged with murder in connection with a Thursday night slaying in East Chicago Heights. Terry Young of 934 East 17th Street was charged yesterday by the state's attorney's office following Young's reported admission. He fired a shot during the fracas, which apparently began as an argument over a woman. East Chicago Heights Police Sergeant George Nance says the investigation into the shooting incident is continuing. 2 persons, 21-year-old Edward Clerk and 23-year-old Michael Jackson, were shot to death. Nance says ballistics tests will be done to determine which gun is responsible for the death of Jackson. Young reportedly told police Jackson fired at himself and Clerk when the two went to Jackson. Nance says Young contends Jackson fired first and hit Clerk. Nance says the bullet taken from Jackson's body will be compared with test firings from 2 revolvers and 1 shotgun recovered at the scene. Young has also been charged with unlawful use of a weapon. Young is scheduled to appear in Markham Court tomorrow afternoon. The Cook County Medical Examiner has asked 2 of the county's top experts in facial reconstruction to help identify the bodies of 9 victims in the John Wayne Gacy murder case. Dr. Robert Stein says he has asked for funds to hire Betty Pat Gatliff and Dr. Clyde Snow, both of Oklahoma. The 2 have done more facial reconstructions than anyone else in the U.S. The medical examiner's office still has not identified 9 bodies, and Stein says that without x-rays or dental